This time we'll be going over monsters. I'm sorry there was such a large gap between the Skellige video and this one. The set kind of came out right after I released that. I wasn't really expecting that. So I've been like actually playing with the new set and everything. So we're going to have a like better idea of what these cards do. I'll go over what I initially thought of them and what they ended up being, at least as far as we can tell now. And also some old cards changed, so they'll be worth going over. So we get to see pretty much everything in its entirety now. So some of the first things that you'll notice the change with monsters is leaders, Unseen Elder, Arrakis Queen. They got inverted. This is a new one. Well, this is the new one, but it's swapped over here. So Unseen Elder just drains unit by half. This is essentially just whatever their highest unit is plus 4 because you're taking half of their strength giving it to Unseen Elder. So if they have a 20-point thing and you Unseen Elder it, Unseen Elder was a 24-point play. This is pretty good in the meta right now, considering how many Ciri Nova decks there are. So this card effectively counters Ciri Nova. In any metagame where we're going to have like giant idiots, Unseen Elder is just a good catch-all leader. It doesn't synergize with anything, but is pretty powerful. All of these other leaders are the same. They did take Frost away from Dagon, but that's not a big deal. Never used that mode anyway. Just streamlining cards, making them more flavorful, I guess. And now we can get over to an actual new card. Weavis Incantation. So Weavis Incantation allows you to strengthen all relics in your deck, wherever they are, like battlefield, graveyard, doesn't matter, or to tutor for a relic and strengthen it by 2. Decks that I've tried and seen other people try involving this card revolve around playing this, renewing it, so you have like 15-point fiends that you can then eat with ghoul for 19-point ghouls. It also gives you access to a 36-point crones if you get it to do it both times. Obviously the deck is a bit inconsistent because it relies very heavily on drawing this card or Royal Decree, but when it works it's incredibly strong. The Weavis Incantation makes all of the cards in that deck worth a preposterous amount. So she does help foster a whole new archetype, which is really cool. It's not something that existed before, and it is powerful, just not super consistent. We'll see if people can maybe streamline it moving forward, but this is definitely one of the better monsters cards, I'd say, that came out. So if you're interested in crones and all of that stuff, this is definitely worth a craft. It's a card that we'll likely see play moving forward and can only get better with additional sets because more relics will get printed over time. Moving on to the other crone, Whispress. Whispress allows you to play bronze or silver organic card from your deck. Some of the more powerful organic cards you can get are Monster's Nest is the chief one. That's like the most important hit. You also have Parasite. You can get any of the neutral organic cards. Like we can even just go over here and look. Everything. So these are all the things you can get with Weavis. Manticore Venom, Mandrake. This other nonsense, not really worth it. But mainly like these 4 are kind of the things you would want to play to tutor with. And she's really powerful with all of those, just allowing you to have access to a toolbox, which like a toolbox that allows you to have access to another toolbox in Monster's Nest. It just gives you a lot of options. So it's definitely a strong card. We'll have to see how Monsters develops, how much of a premium we're putting on silver slots, how many we can devote towards these organic cards. But just in general, she's a pretty strong card, and we will likely be seeing her played as well. So Monster's got some decent golds. It's very synergy-driven faction, so people haven't really figured it out yet. And speaking of synergy, we have Brew S. I don't have a Brew S because I haven't decided to craft one yet. But Brew S allows you to resurrect 2 Death Wish units. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, Death Wish changed in this patch to not trigger between rounds. So anytime you're playing Death Wish cards, you have to have ways to kill them yourself in order to attain value, whether through consumption or the ogre who throws things at people. This guy, Cyclops. So you have to have some kind of synergy. And now if we look through the Death Wish units and monsters, Neckard is not really a good hit because you're rezzing it. It loses its boost. Not very good. Dow is probably the best option for like all of the Death Wish synergies, really, because the lesser Dows are now 4. So this card can be really powerful alongside Barbagazi, which is the new Ekimara, or Cyclops, like we just saw. So this is like one of the more powerful Death Wish units. Obviously, we have Arcaspore, which deals 4 when it dies, and also does its bouncy thing, and Rotfiend that deals 2 to a row. This is okay. They're more situationally powerful. This is more all-around powerful. So if you are building a deck involving Dow, you want to eat them with something and then brew S to get more Dows. That seems like a reasonable thing to do. I don't know how powerful it is. It's like a lot of points if you can then kill them again, because it's 12, 13, eat the things, plus 8 on both. It's not awful. We'll have to see if anything comes of that, but that's how you would use that card, and we'll see how that pans out. Anything else that changed? Draug. Draug is different now. Draug resurrects units, and I played this a couple times. It seems to be random. Just like picking units from either graveyard and rezzing them, so it's kind of graveyard hate. But he makes 1 power units until the row is full, so the row limit is now 9, meaning Draug makes 8 1-strength things at maximum. So he's an 18-point card. You can use this to synergize with Yennefer or Triss Butterfly spell, which got better because it triggers at end of turn now, so it triggers immediately when you play it. Also, to a lesser extent, where is he? Ruin, because Ruin buffs curse things. All of these little Draugrs are cursed, so that's like a little thing you could do if you feel like that. So this card's not awful. It synergizes well with Swarm decks. If you are already building a Swarm deck, this is a solid finisher for that. And you can just have this like wide row to pump. Not a lot of things are equipped to interact with wide boards outside of Trebuchet and Northern Realms. So I think this card's like reasonably powerful, reasonably playable. It'll be interesting to see what people end up doing with it. And now Old Spear Tip. Old Spear Tip actually got split into 2 cards. Old Spear Tip and Sleeping Giant. Old Spear Tip itself does 2 damage to up to 5 enemies on the opposite row. So it's kind of a raw 20-point card. It's like the flipped mode of what it did before. Side note, don't like that they split this card up. Old Spear Tip was an interesting card with an interesting play pattern. It was like this puzzle to, after you played it, flip it multiple times, like trying to figure out how to do that. It was just a fun interaction. It wasn't played a lot recently, but that's not because it was bad. Or like design just like wasn't good compared to what other stuff was going on in Monsters, cough cough Woodland Spirit. So don't like that they split this card up, but it is. So Old Spear Tip, just 10 strength, pseudo last rate your row. It's like whatever. It's very boring, but it's 20-pointer, so might see play. Sleeping Giant, a little bit more synergy based, strengthens all the Ogroid units wherever they are. We could actually search this. These are all the Ogroids. And if you'll notice, they all kind of synergize with Frost. And I guess we can kind of go over these other Ogroids while we're here. Ice Troll and Bridge Troll. Both of these synergize with weather, specifically Frost in the case of Ice Troll. So Ice Troll duels an enemy if it's under Frost, deals double damage. So it would deal 8 on the first hit if it was under Frost. And if you have strengthened it with Sleeping Giant, it does 10. So with Sleeping Giant, this becomes a 15-point bronze, like minimum. It can duel. The dual math is weird. It can be higher than that, I think. But that's like not a bad card. If things are under Frost, you can move around Frost with Bridge Troll, allowing you to move in Hazard to any row. So there is definitely some Frost Giant deck that here, like Jotun, also synergizes with Frost and is an Ogroid. So you could definitely do stuff here. You could play Goliath, because sure. We could talk about Goliath, new card. Base 10, boost self by 7. Whenever the unit is damaged, you deal 2 to itself. So you want to play this after your opponent has passed, so they can't interact with it, or against decks that just don't dispense damage, whichever one. 17-point silver is pretty solid, if assuming they don't utilize the drawback. So whenever you can protect this card from damage, pretty strong. Whenever you can't, pretty bad. Now we can move along. There's all the gold cards for monsters. We can get to Divana Runestone, and we can kind of talk about all of the runestones here. Although they do change from faction to faction because different factions have different quality, like silver pools. Specifically, monsters we can go over have a lot of synergy-based silvers, like She-Troll of Vergen, Grave Hag. This is Grave Hag. I'm not calling that. I'm not calling it that. It's Grave Hag. Grave Hag, Shadow, the 3 Crones, Nithral, Ruin. Any of those are going to be bad hits off this because they're so synergy based. Like sometimes you'll be playing a deck that cares about Ruin or Death Shadow, and this card will be great, but there are a lot of dead hits across the board on monsters. But you always have the upside of rolling the Spy, which is nonsense. So we've seen it in other factions, especially Nilfgaard right now plays the Runestone because their silver pool is much better, and they could also just high roll the Spy. So in the future, I would like to see these cards change so they can't make Spies, because this and also Heim and Skellige, anything that can really just discover a Spy, honestly, is defining games in a way that is really unhealthy, where all of these are just, okay, did I high roll the Spy? Awesome, I win. Or like then they have to high roll their Spy and then it's even. It's just not a healthy interaction. I really don't like it. On a raw power level basis, will people play this in monsters? The monster one is probably one of the weakest for the reasons I just mentioned. But again, if you want access to multiple Spies, you can do that with this card like some percentage of the time. So don't love the design of the Runestones while they are making Spies. They're actually pretty interesting when they're not, but for as long as they make Spies, don't like them and hope they change. Parasite, we went over Parasite a little bit earlier when we were talking about Whispress. It's just 12 damage or boost 12, so if the format's ever in a spot where you need to be killing things in play, preferably things that are like 10 or higher, that Alzur's Thunder couldn't kill efficiently, Parasite might be good. But as long as, if that doesn't matter, if removing the thing from the board doesn't matter, raw 12-point silver, pretty medium. So you do have flexibility where you have the removal, or you can just boost if there's no good target to kill. That's nice, but you really need to be playing this in a format where the 12 damage matters, where killing something that Alzur's Thunder couldn't matters. Nothing comes to mind right now in the current format, but things can change. This is a reactive card. Its power level will be determined by what other people are doing in the format. So even though it may not be good right now, that could certainly change if the format shifts. She-Troll Vergen. This card is actually pretty cool. I was playing with it earlier. It plays a Bronze Deathwish unit from your deck, consumes it, and then boosts self by the base power, which is just consuming it. So this card is good with Dow, as we went over earlier, New Earth Elemental. That's one of the better hits you can get with this. It's probably the best hit, actually. You could also, because of how New Necker works, if you want to pull that from your deck in round 3, this is another way to do that. It's kind of like a second Shadow. So this card has a decent amount of utility in that. One weird thing, though, the way this currently resolves, if your opponent has a Savage Bear in play, you will play Sea-Troll, it will die, it will pull the Deathwish unit, and nothing will happen. Which is really weird. But that's how it currently resolves. I found that out the hard way. So don't play this when your opponent has a Savage Bear in play. But it's an interesting card. Toolbox thing, again, gets better as more Deathwish units are printed, so if it's not that good right now, that could certainly change. But I do think that there are some applications for this card in decks that people may not have found yet. And then moving on to Striga. Striga, 5 strength, deal 8 to a non-monster unit. This card is very narrow. It's not even that high on the raw point scale. It's just a 13 max. And damage cards like this are very rarely hitting for the full total, so it's probably closer to 11 or 12. It also has the drawback of just like not being able to hit monsters units. So in a monster mirror, this card is going to be pretty close to dead. Sometimes they'll have a neutral unit, but you're like kind of praying for that. I don't think the upside on this is good enough given the drawback, so it's not something that will likely justify the silver slot right now. Maybe again the 8 damage will be relevant against something at some point in the format, but as of right now, the opportunity cost of giving up a silver slot for this does not seem worth it. We'll have to see how things go more forward. And then, kind of new card, Algul. This is just old Katakan, or whatever they changed Katakan's name to again. The thing that eats something from the graveyard. So consume a bronze or silver unit from the graveyard. They just changed the name. It's now Algul. Still a necrophage. Or I guess the other one was a vampire. Yeah, Necrat was a vampire. So they changed the creature type. That I don't think matters right now, but it'll likely matter later, especially with the Moonlight synergies. Speaking of which, Necrat, the old Katakan, now spawns Moonlight. Moonlight, other new card, allows you to apply Full Moon or Blood Moon to a friendly or enemy row. Full Moon allows you to pump a vampire or beast by 2 once per turn. Blood Moon deals 2 damage to everything in that row on contact. On contact means when you play Blood Moon, when something moves there, when something is played there, whenever it appears in that row for any reason, it will take 2 damage. So it's a source of inevitability. You could play this and get a +2 per turn going on your own guy. Or if it's later in the round and your opponent has a wide row, you can play this in Blood Moon and it'll be a pseudo lacerate. So I do like the play pattern with Blood Moon where there's inevitability side and a burst side that usually leads to compelling decisions. On a raw power level basis, though, thus far, not been super impressed by it, but we'll get that more with the other Moonlight Synergy cards. We can move along. Any of these new. Ruin. We can talk about Ruin. Strengthen all your insectoid and cursed units wherever they are. Contrary to how this card is worded, it does not pump itself when it enters the battlefield, so it is just an 8. And if we could go through insectoid. These are the insects. It pumps mainly Arrakis Drone, and the tokens from Arrakis Behemoth are likely the biggest synergy with this card, as well as Draug that we mentioned earlier. So if you are playing a Devour deck that you plan to like have long rounds with, make a bunch of spiders with Arrakis Behemoth, play a couple Barbagazi, you can use this as like a Yennefer or a Foltest at the end of the round. It's pretty narrow, like that's the only situation where it's good, but it's good in that situation, so maybe you could justify playing it there. It also is worth noting that the strength on the Barbagazi carries over, so that's not nothing. Goliath we talked about. We talked about Moonlight. Foglet changed, worthy of note. No longer comes back from the graveyard. Just makes it so you have to play multiple for multiple fog effects. If you have Dagon and Woodland Spirit in your deck and you want multiple Foglets, you have to play 2 Foglets. You can't play 1 anymore. Not sure I agree with that, but it's what they decided to go with. Harpy, now just a 4 instead of a 3 that does 1 damage. So essentially the same thing, it just doesn't have the random damage flying all over the place, which I guess is good. Siren. Siren just pulls Moonlight. This is essentially just Wild Hunt Hound for Moonlight. Pretty much the same thing. Allows you to thin your deck, get your Moonlight more consistently. Also is a beast, so you can play it on the row with Siren and immediately starts getting pumped. So if you're interested in playing Moonlight, you're definitely going to be playing Siren. Ekimara, replaced by Barbagazi. Now just drains the unit by 3. So it's just an 11. It's not very good. 3 damage really isn't going to matter a whole bunch. Not sure what the point of this card is anymore, but here you go. Maybe Vampire Synergies will be a thing later. Ice Troll we talked about. Werecat. Werecat, and we can actually go over a lot of the Moonlight units. I'll kind of go through them as we go along. There are 2 classes of Moonlight units that care about Blood Moon and units that care about Full Moon. Werecat cares about Blood Moon. Werecat deals 5 damage to an enemy and then deals 1 to all enemies underneath Blood Moon. The target you hit with the 5 damage does not need to be under Blood Moon for the second ability to trigger. You just put the first 5 damage anywhere and then the Blood Moon dudes will take the 1 damage. So this card has a pretty high ceiling depending upon like how many units are in Blood Moon. If you are focusing on that side of it, this card is good. The other one that cares about that is Lamia. Lamia deals 4 damage to an enemy or 7 if it's under Blood Moon. So both of these cards care about killing your opponent's stuff under Blood Moon. So you kind of need to focus your deck on one side or the other. And conversely, we have Werewolf. Werewolf boosts by 7 on contact with Full Moon. So, like I said, you can't really do both of these because you're either playing Full Moon on your side or Blood Moon on the other. Obviously, if you draw multiple Moonlights, you can do both, but you're stretching yourself pretty thin. So I'm not sure you can really support a deck with both, at least not in my experience. So Werewolf I actually think is the best Moonlight unit. It's just a 14, assuming you have Moonlight. It's also immune, although it's not immune to the things you care about on a big unit. It can still get Scorched, still get Ignied. So it is a little bit resilient to some things, but it's still vulnerable to some more important stuff. So I do think this is one of the better Moonlight units in Werewolf. It's really strong, especially when you compare it to Alpha Werewolf, the other counterpart, which is a 12 when you put it into Moonlight, which is weird. That this one is a 14 and this one is a 12. I understand this makes 2 additional bodies, but still seems a little bit underpowered. So again, if you want to build a Moonlight deck around Full Moon, you have Alpha Werewolf and Werewolf. If you want to build it around Blood Moon, you have Werecat and Lamia. Let's see, any other new cards? Oh, Forktail. So Forktail just is an 8 strength unit that consumes 2 things. So if it works really well with Harpy, we play Harpy, have the 2 eggs, and then immediately Forktail eating both eggs. It's like a more bursty version of Ran Warrior, whereas Ran Warrior provides inevitability. It keeps eating things exponentially forever every 2 turns. If you want to be more bursty in your game plan with consume, Forktail is going to be more productive to that end. So you now have a choice of like kind of the speed you want your Devour deck to go at, which is pretty neat. So Forktail will definitely have a place in consume depending upon what you want to do. It's definitely at the right rate, and the burst off of Harpy is pretty high. So we'll definitely see this card a bunch moving forward. And just like to go over it again quickly, Barbagazi is the new Ekamara. It's the same card, it's just a little roly-poly centipede now. It's the only difference. Everything else is the same. And I do believe that that is everything. All these other cards are the same. Yeah, that is it. So that is our Monsters review. Again, I will be doing the other factions pretty soon. Look to this channel in the coming days for additional videos. I will also be adding deck techs of the new decks that I have discovered as the format develops. And I thank you all for watching. And I'll check back with you next time. Have a good day.